Is a global pandemic starting in China? Hong Kong protests communism. And don't get caught in your pajamas in this Chinese city. That and more on this week's China Uncensored. This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This week's China news headlines. First, an update on the deadly Chinese coronavirus that spread from the city of Wuhan. As of Friday morning, Chinese state-run media has confirmed there were 887 cases nationwide with 26 deaths. Don't worry, Chinese authorities are taking resolute action against the new virus. They've raised the public health response to the highest emergency level, which is good. They've also completely locked down travel in 13 cities, including Wuhan, where it all started. The travel ban now covers more than 30 million people. Authorities have also banned large gatherings around the country. They even shut down Disneyland. So if you hate long lines, now's the time to go. A classic Chinese Communist Party solution. They're cracking down on the virus like it were a political dissident. Except, of course, it's too late. One virologist who helped identify SARS in 2003 told Chinese media that a bigger outbreak is certain, and that we have passed through the golden period for prevention and control. If only they used the golden period for that instead of a massive cover-up. Not to mention that millions of people have already started traveling throughout the country for the Lunar New Year, which starts today. And in Wuhan, the scapegoating of local officials has already begun. Meanwhile, the first patient to have the virus in the US is being treated in Seattle by a robot. That is not a joke. The good news is he seems to be recovering. Meanwhile, a second US case has been confirmed in Chicago. I hope Chicago has robots too. Now over to Hong Kong, where protests are continuing. Only now they also have to worry about this weird Chinese virus too. It's a good thing so many people wear masks in Hong Kong. Last Sunday, Hong Kongers held an anti-communism rally. It was called Universal Siege Against Communism, and it was to call on other countries to sanction Hong Kong officials. These people held up signs that say "Heaven destroys the Chinese Communist Party," before police started shoving their way through and firing tear gas. Police originally allowed the rally, but changed their mind and shut it down after too many people showed up. Several fights then broke out between police and protesters, plus the tear gas. Police made several arrests. One of the people arrested was Ventus Lau, the person who organized the rally. He's being charged with, among other things, inciting others to take part in an unlawful assembly. Yes, Lau was charged for inciting people to take part in an unlawful rally that police had previously said was totally lawful until they changed their minds in the middle of the rally and started tear gassing people. In other words, it was a typical Sunday in Hong Kong. But don't worry, that's going to change thanks to the brilliant minds of Chinese communist officials. The new head of the liaison office is pushing for the draconian national security law they tried to pass in 2003. In 2003, it resulted in massive protests. So it failed before, but clearly doing the exact same thing is going to work this time. I believe we have a photo of the new head of the liaison office right here. Human Rights Watch has released their Human Rights Report for 2020. It includes this special feature called China's Global Threat to Human Rights. The director of Human Rights Watch flew to Hong Kong for the official release, but he was denied entry.
And the focus of the report this year was going to be how the Chinese government is really trying to deliberately undermine the international human rights system. Sadly, as I arrived here, the Chinese government decided it didn't want to let me in. So even though I've been able to enter Hong Kong freely before, this time, for the first time, they blocked me.
Surprisingly, denying him entry to Hong Kong didn't actually silence the report. He just released it in New York instead, and as a result, it got more media attention. Imagine that. There's finally an update on Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou. She was accused of violating US sanctions on Iran. For more than a year, she's been detained in a harsh prison known as Canada. Will she get extradited to the US? Well, extradition hearings have begun, but that's just the beginning.
This week's hearing focuses on whether Meng's alleged crimes in the US are also illegal in Canada. Meng's defense say the central issue is so-called double criminality, meaning charges she is accused of in the US must also be considered crimes in Canada. Meng's lawyers argue the case is founded on allegations of breaching US sanctions against Iran, but Canada has rejected those same sanctions. So they argue Meng can't be extradited.
And legal experts say it could be years before a decision is reached. So Meng will remain in legal limbo in Canada. Don't feel too bad for her, though. Her prison cell is house arrest at her $12 million luxury home. Plus, she's getting by with a little help from her friends. And by friends, I mean people who were paid to protest on her behalf. Who says money can't buy you friends? There's another Meng in the hot seat this week. The former head of Interpol, Meng Hongwei. No relation. He's been sentenced to more than a decade in prison for corruption. And I don't think his prison cell will look like this. How did a corrupt guy like Meng Hongwei get elected to the head of the international police? Partly on the strength of his record of combating graft in China. Ironic. Meng is also part of a political faction tied to former Chinese leader Jiang Zemin, with whom current Chinese leader Xi Jinping is engaged in a power struggle. It's nice to know that despite everything else that's putting stress on the Communist Party, the power struggle still goes on. But if you're thinking both Mengs haven't got a prayer, well, most people in China might not have a prayer either, because the Chinese government is planning to reinterpret classic religious books like the Bible, the Quran, and Buddhist texts. Socialist core values should guide the reinterpretation process. Oh, good. And even more good news for religion in China. The Vatican has chosen a new bishop for Hong Kong, but they haven't officially announced who it is. Why? According to the Catholic News Agency, it's because of concerns that the guy they chose is too sympathetic to the Chinese Communist Party. To clarify, the Vatican's concern is not that the new bishop is too sympathetic to the Communist Party. No. Their concern is just that announcing it would upset the people of Hong Kong, who are protesting the Communist Party. Sure, heaven will destroy the CCP, just not under the Vatican's watch. And now, witness the power of China's fully operational radio telescope. Not only is it the largest radio telescope in the world, but, like the feelings of the Chinese people, it's also the most sensitive, which is probably why it was built in a depression. And finally, another technological breakthrough. China is using AI facial recognition technology to shame people for wearing their pajamas. Because wearing pajamas in public is a thing in some parts of China. This crackdown is another one of those things you only see in a country like China, where top-down government directives lead to idiotic local policies. Officials in Suzhou, a city of 6 million people in Anhui province, got word they needed to root out uncivilized behavior. Nice and vague. So obviously they took action, which for them meant publishing surveillance photos taken by street cameras of residents wearing pajamas in public, along with parts of their names, government identification numbers, and their locations. That sparked a nationwide outcry, so local officials quickly apologized. And that does it for this week's China News Headlines. What do you think? Leave your comments below. And as I've mentioned before, YouTube demonetizes episodes like this because they're too controversial for advertisers. We would have been run out of business years ago if it weren't for fan support through the crowdfunding website Patreon. So, as a thank you to these fans, I answer their questions at the end of some of my episodes. This question comes from Thomas Kohlmeyer. Which of the 2020 presidential candidates is the most anti-China out of all of them? Because I'm getting the impression lately that no one wants to stand up to China. Good question, Thomas. And if by anti-China you mean anti-Chinese regime, none of the candidates are. Even President Trump has not explicitly said anything against the Chinese Communist Party or Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Although to be fair, through Trump's actions on trade, he's done a lot to weaken their grip on power. And some key people in Trump's administration, like Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, have openly criticized the regime's human rights abuses. Among the 12 Democrats still in the presidential race, it's not clear so far whether any of them will meaningfully stand up to the Chinese regime. While some of them have criticized China's human rights abuses, they also say that we need to work with them, or they say nothing at all. Michael Bloomberg has even openly said China is not a dictatorship. which I guess makes him the most anti-China of all, if you take anti-China to mean anti-Chinese people. The poor guy makes billions of dollars a year from China, so I can understand where he's coming from. Maybe after the primaries are finally over, the remaining Democratic candidate will try to match Trump's toughness when it comes to China trade, but I won't hold my breath. And since politicians aren't doing enough, I hope you will. Share China Uncensored episodes with your friends, spread it on social media, and support our show through Patreon. Pledge $1 or more per episode to help us keep making this show. And as a thank you, I answer questions from patrons at the end of some of my episodes. Thanks for watching China Uncensored. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.